to change out what is problematic. Problematic in their view, in the social justice-y view. I say no. You don't change history. You don't screw with history. Okay, so over the holiday break, the brilliant biologist E.O. Wilson passed away. And yeah, he had some controversial ideas, as I understand it. Being not a biologist myself, I've been reading. He's definitely had some controversial ideas. But at least from what I could find in his writings, in his works, no one would say that he was a racist. And so, Scientific American, of course, and I'm not going to say this is simply Scientific American. This is a particular author at Scientific American writing an opinion piece for Scientific American who basically wrote a hit piece on E.O. Wilson. And she had a number of things in here that were laughable, to say the least. And I am not the only one who has called this what it is, a pretty terrible article. But like I said, I flipped over here to Medium for a second, and this was another person who excoriated Scientific American for writing this particular piece here. And I've got some similar comments, but I'll go back and forth. But I'm gonna go back and forward with this also. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things with this one. With the death of biologist E.O. Wilson on Sunday, so this was published in Scientific American on December 29th, 2021, so it's a couple of weeks ago, I find myself again reflecting on the complicated legacies of scientists whose works are built on racist ideas and how these ideas came to define our understanding of the world. After a long clinical career as a registered nurse, I became a laboratory-trained scientist as researchers mapped the first draft of the human genome. It was during this time that I intimately familiarized myself with Wilson's work and his dangerous ideas on what factors influenced human behavior. His influential text, Sociobiology, the New Synthesis, contributed to the false dichotomy of nature versus nurture and spawned an entire field of behavioral psychology grounded in the notion that differences amongst humans could be explained by genetics, inheritance, and other biological mechanisms. Finding out that Wilson thought this way was a huge disappointment because I enjoyed his novel Anthill, which was published much later and written for the public. So she's basically accusing him, as Peter Burns here says, of being racist in here. It's nothing. And I would say she did give absolutely nothing. No proof that the gentleman had a racist bone in his body. So I find this hard to begin with. And of course, Wilson was hardly alone in his problematic beliefs. His predecessor, mathematician Carl Pearson, anthropologist Francis Galton, Charles Darwin, Gregor Mendel, and others also published works and spoke of theories fraught with racist ideas about distributions of health and illness in populations without any attention to the context in which these distributions occur. Again, no proof. No proof to any of this is what she's saying. Saying that Wilson's field is fraught with racism. Granted, yes, that yes, there were evil things about eugenicists, okay? And those two probably could be argued in here. How is Gregor Mendel, though? Darwin is a stretch. The name that from the list, though, that really struck me is just like, yep. Gregor Mendel. The guy spent his entire life in a monastery observing how peas grow. Unless he wrote somewhere about peas, why is his name included here? Gregor Mendel was all about genetics. He didn't say much of anything about people in his writings, at least to what I know. And so it's fascinating here to hear this being repeated that way. Oh, goodness. Even modern geneticists and genome scientists struggle with the inherent racism in the way they gather and analyze data. Prove it. Again, I want to say prove it. You got to prove it, really. Really, I give you that there were a couple of folks in there who were very, very much proponents of eugenics, and that was awful, and they can be excoriated properly for that. In his memoir, A Life Decoded, My Genome, My Life, geneticist Craig Venter writes, the complex provenance of ideas means their origin is often open to interpretation. To put the legacy of their work in the proper perspective, a more nuanced understanding of problematic scientists is necessary. It is true that work can be both important and problematic. They can coexist. Therefore, it is necessary to evaluate and critique these scientists, considering specifically the value of their work and at the same time contributions to scientific racism. Okay, I gotta do a whole video on what this concept of scientific racism is, because I don't think they're referring to science as being racist. Maybe the way they're framing it that it looks that way. I don't know for sure off the top of my head, so I'm going to go with that there for a minute. Now it gets interesting and hysterical because first, the so-called normal distribution of statistics assumes that our default humans who serve... This is why I get annoyed, because this woman does not understand statistics. I have to say it. I hate to say it, but I have to say it because of what she says in this first sentence. First, the so-called normal distribution of statistics assumes that there are default humans who serve as the standard that the rest of us can be accurately measured against. No, actually, it doesn't assume that. It doesn't assume that at all. That's absolutely and utterly, profoundly incorrect. There's nothing there for me to say, but that doesn't make any dangum sense. Allow me to show you. I will go dig it up here momentarily and be right back. Okay. Statistics, the normal distribution. The normal distribution is an important probability distribution used in statistics. Many real-world examples of data are normally distributed. And this, if you've seen it, the bell curve, that is the normal distribution. You have probably seen it. You have probably interacted with it. It says nothing about there being some normal person that everybody else is measured against. That is not what a normal distribution does. With respect to a characteristic, let's say somebody's test scores or something like that, a normal distribution might be used to characterize the test scores of an entire population of people or an entire population of students. It is not the benchmark by which one is measured against. That is not what this is. Let me go back to this. That is not what that is. That there are default humans who serve as the standard that the rest of us can accurately be measured against. No, that is not what the statistical distribution, the normal distribution assumes about anything or anyone. It is merely something that can be used to describe the entirety of a population, if that population fits that beautiful bell curve shape, which it does happen, and sometimes it's pretty rare. In other disciplines, like for precipitation, for example, if you're looking at daily precipitation totals, a normal distribution would not work for that, because there's so many days where it's right around zero, tiny amounts in here, so it's like, woo! All like that with with precipitation. Pardon the sound effects. But this is why I'm looking at this. I'm laughing. That is not an assumption that is actually in the normal distribution of statistics. That is not what that means. Someone may be above average or below average in line with that distribution, but that is not an assumption that is made. That there is a default human. That never happens in statistics. This is why I'm just like, no. This does not have an understanding of statistics. It is not saying that there's a default human that is the standard involved in there. It is saying that you might be above or below average with respect to something, but that doesn't... Oh my gosh, this is so hysterical to me. No. And I think it was over here. Yeah, Oh yeah, so-called normal distribution is not about default humans. It's about the fact that in many statistical studies, the characteristics of the population tend to cluster around a mean. The average height of the human population is 5'7", then most individuals will be around that height. The outliers, the very tall and very short people, will be just a tiny minority. So, by the way, so there's things like that in here that I have to laugh at. This author does a good job of trying to destroy the reputation of a scientist in here because may have held some views with which you disagree. And I talked about this in the Peril of Politicizing Science video, talking about Professor Anna Krailov's letter there. You can have profound disagreements and find all sorts of things personally off with somebody, values and things and what have you. Like I said, the two guys who didn't talk about eugenics in there, others who did horrible things, that was horrible. And horrible beliefs, I don't share them. All those kinds of things there. That doesn't mean their contributions to the field are invalid either. Whatever E.O. Wilson's personal beliefs are, I don't know. Fair enough, I don't know. I may or may not share them. That's not my point. That's not the point. He contributed some amazing things to biology. And that should not be discounted just because you dislike some of the things he might have said. Let's see. The fact that we don't adequately take into account differences between experimental and reference group determinants of risk and resilience, particularly in health sciences, has been a hallmark of inadequate scientific methods based on theoretical underpinnings of superior subject and inferior one. Prove it. Prove it. You stated something, prove it. Commenting on COVID and vaccine acceptance in an interview with PBS NewsHour, recently retired director of National Institutes of Health, Francis Collins, pointed out, we may be underinvested in research on human behavior. That might be a fair enough point. The application of the scientific method matters. What works for ants and other non-human species is not always relevant for health and or human outcomes. Well, no one ever said it is. You may follow the same process, but you don't always do the same experimental method for something. So, in principle, I actually kind of agree with that statement. That, what kinds of analyses and tests and what exact kind of questions you are asking and how the scientific method is applied is in there. But I don't agree with what comes and follows. You notice something interesting? No proof. No proof. For example, the associations of black people with poor health outcomes, economic disadvantages, reduced life expectancy can be explained by structural racism, yet blackness or black culture is frequently cited as the driver of those health disparities. I don't think anybody's ever done that based on ants, to be honest. Now that I'm reading this, looking at this closer, I don't think anybody's done that comparison based on ants. Here, I wonder what my other colleagues. Oh, yeah. Now, we'll get to that in here. So, let's see. Yeah, context does matter. And generally speaking, not necessarily everything that's applied to ants would. And what he did in analysis and a thing with ants would not apply here. That said, you provide absolutely no proof of the claim here. I would have expected at least some kind of citation in here and not a link to an American Progress article. I would have expected something to go to a research article here. So I don't necessarily agree with this statement here. I don't necessarily disagree with the first statement, to be honest. I don't necessarily disagree with that in the notion that, you wouldn't apply it exactly the same to everything. It is still the same process, but you would do different tests. You would be asking different questions and all that kind of stuff. So no, that part I don't disagree with. Examining nature versus nurture without any attention to externalities, such as opportunities and potential, financial structures, and that deeply influence the dispassionate query will lead to individualistic notions of value and the meaning of human lives, while as a society, our collective fates are inextricably linked. Okay, wait a second. I just noticed noticed something that's a contradiction. It's been a while since I read this article, so I'm rereading it and I'm seeing something, and I just noticed something that is absolutely a contradiction. Or at least I think is a contradiction. Hold on. This kind of claim right here is very much an individualistic approach here, because she's claiming that you cannot measure the individual against the default human, supposedly. That you cannot do that, despite the fact that that's not what the normal distribution does. Sorry, you're incorrect on that one. But at the same time is saying down here, this dispassionate query will lead to individualistic notions of the value and meaning of human lives, while as a society, our collective fates are inextricably linked. That would seem a contradiction to me, that the author is saying, okay, you can't judge me, the individual, based upon this distribution, and yet we're collectively all linked together. So I could judge. Very confusing. Anyway, as we are currently seeing, okay, this is where it gets scary. To be honest, I was reading this and like, holy sweet bleeping jeepers. And this is, again, why I don't consider Scientific American to be a reputable source for information anymore with respect to scientific publications. Anyway, how do we engage with the problematic work of scientists whose legacy is complicated? I would suggest 3 strategies to move toward a more nuanced understanding of their work and context. First, truth and reconciliation are necessary in the scientific record, including attention to citational practices when using or reporting problematic work. This approach includes thinking critically about where and when to include historically problematic work, and the context necessary for readers to understand the limitation of the ideas embedded in it. This will require commitments from journal editors, peer reviewers, and scientific community to invest in retrofitting existing publications with this expertise. They can do so by employing humanities scholars, journalists, and other science communicators with the appropriate expertise to evaluate health and life sciences manuscripts submitted for publication. Let me read that again. This will require commitments from journal editors, peer reviewers, and the scientific community to invest in retrofitting existing publications with this expertise. They can do so by employing humanities scholars, journalists, and other science communicators with the appropriate expertise to evaluate health and life sciences manuscripts submitted for publication. In other words, rewriting an article that has been peer-reviewed, that was published, work that upon which we have built other studies, upon which other studies have been based, or other studies reviewing the previous study have been done, or any number of different things. Rewriting them a bit, or retrofitting them somehow to include some information to change out what is problematic. Problematic in their view. In the social justice-y view. I say no. You don't change history. You don't screw with history, kind of thing, because that screws up. The past is the building blocks for the future, as I tend to think about it, particularly with science, as we build and we work on different studies and we move forward in time. You need the past to work toward the future. Yeah, no. That's scary. Truth and reconciliation. That screams of all sorts of things that are not good in here to just utterly change the record to suit your interest. And again, go back to the Peril of Politicizing Science video with Professor Anna Krylov. That video was very much in discussion about that. Her article was very much in discussion about that. I actually have another one of her articles that I found recently, was recently published or recently accepted for publication that I am looking forward to reading, and I'm going to show you on this channel again also. So she's been busy, and I appreciate that. Okay. Let's see. But anyway, that particular aspect is scary. Second, diversifying the scientific workforce is crucial not only to asking new types of research questions and unlocking new discoveries, but also to conducting better science. Other scholars have pointed out that feminist standpoint theory is helpful in understanding white empiricism and who is eligible to be a worthy observer of the human condition and our world. We can apply the same approach to scientific research. All a society loses when there are limited perspectives that are grounded in faulty notions of another group of humans' potential. As my work and others have shown, the people most burdened by poor health conditions are more often the ones trying to address the underlying causes with innovative solutions and strategies that can be scientifically tested. Let me put it to you this way. I have read this paper. I have been debating whether or not to talk about it on this channel. The notion of white empiricism, if I could talk about it safely on this, I'm probably going to end up talking about it to a degree or not, but I will show it to you because the other article in Medium handily summarized it. But this article where this is defined is on its face, this notion that they've put here on its face is blatantly racist. I'm not going to lie, it blatantly is. Let's see. Other scholars have pointed out the feminist standpoint. Okay, to this link, I was hit with it. Here it is. White empiricism undermines the significant theory of 20th century physics, general relativity. Albert Einstein's monumental contribution to our empirical understanding of gravity is rooted in the principle of covariance, which is the simple idea that there is no single objective frame of reference that is more objective than any other. All frames of reference, all observers are equally competent and capable of observing the universal laws that underlie the workings of our physical universe. Why then are string theorists calling for an end to empiricism rather than an end to racial hegemony? I believe the answer is in that knowledge production in physics is contingent on the ascribed identities of the physicists. Through the recognition of white empiricism, a bifurcated logic that serves white supremacist traditions and scientists while deontologizing marginalized black women in physics, I propose that black feminist theory intersectionality should change physics, and not just through who becomes a physicist, but through the actual outcomes of what we come to know. Oh, goodness. Yeah, I want to give you a translation of woke speak. The problem with the white empiricism thing here is that it's basically the notion that according to the woke, they presume that some people are more objective, are considered objective observers while other people are not on the basis of race. And the reason I am not giving you the actual language of what it is without having the text in front of me is because I do not want that taken out of context, clipped out of context by somebody. I will gladly share it with you, particularly in my locals community, to show you the craziness of that article. But what she's pointing to here out here is a blatantly racist theory to say that some groups are more objective than others are more capable of being objective observers of the world than others on the basis of race is itself blatantly racist. And this is a concept that is being put out there with respect to science right now. It is fundamentally against the principle of universalism, the normative principle of universalism, with respect to scientific practice. It's also a very woefully incorrect representation of the theory of relativity, but that's a talk for another day. Finally, we need new methods. One of the many gifts of the Human Genome Project was the creativity it spawned beyond revealing the secrets of the genome, such as new rules about the public availability and use of data. Multiple labs and trainees were able to collaborate and share work while establishing independent careers. New rules of engagement emerged around the ethical, legal, and social implications of their work. Undoing scientific racism will require commitments from the entire scientific community to determine the portions of historically problematic work that are relevant and to let the scientific method function the way it was designed to allow for dated ideas to be debunked and replaced. The early work of Venter and Collins was foundational to my dissertation, which examined tumor markers of ovarian cancer. Nice! Congratulations, that's great dissertation work to do. I can appreciate that, actually, having had many members of my family who suffered from cancer. I spent time during my training at NIH learning from these iconic clinicians and scholars and had the occasion to meet and question both of them. As a person who uses science as one of the many tools to understand the world, it is important to remain curious in our work. Creative minds should not be resistant to change when rigorous new data are presented. How we engage with old racist ideas is no exception. You are presuming certain ideas are something. You have not proven any of it. I have not seen you prove any of it in your article here. And I will lead you. I didn't want to read all the way through the Medium article because I don't want to make this video too long. But this is disgusting. This article. This was a disgusting, blatant attack on a scientist. And a general rule: you don't speak ill of the dead. And whatever E.O. Wilson's personal beliefs are and things like that, I don't honestly know. I'm sure I probably would disagree with him on a whole bunch of things. I'm sure I probably would agree with him. He is well respected and well regarded in He is well respected and well regarded in biology, and he absolutely should not be denigrating someone who has passed. Shouldn't be denigrating someone who's done a lot of very good things in their life. Certainly you can critique their beliefs and things like that. I have no problem with that. Absolutely no problem with that. But I don't think you end up denigrating them and starting to call them veiled, reading between their lines. You're calling this person racist, and that is despicable on your part to do. Particularly when the man is not alive anymore to defend himself. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else? So yeah, E.O. Wilson, yeah, there we go. E.O. Wilson did a lot of great things, and I wanted to bring this up because, again, he's obviously not alive to defend himself. E.O. Wilson, let's see, he did a lot of things. Wilson was considered, in a way, Darwin's heir. He's considered the father of biodiversity. He helped popularize the term. Starting to realize how harmful the loss of biodiversity is to our planet, can be for our planet. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, biodiversity is essential to the existence and proper functioning of all ecosystems. EPA lists many benefits to biodiversity, including medicine, food security, and mental health. So think of that. E.O. Wilson popularized biodiversity. He was one of the father of the idea of biodiversity in the world, and that is fantastic. E.O. Wilson fought tooth and nail to reverse biodiversity loss. He founded the Half Earth Project, whose aim is to reverse half the planet for wildlife. Smithsonian Magazine quotes him saying, "It's been in my mind for years that people haven't been thinking big enough, even conservationists. Half Earth is the goal, but it's how we get there and whether we can come up with a system of wild landscapes we can hang on to. I see a chain of uninterrupted corridors forming with twists and turns, some of them opening up to become wide enough to accommodate national biodiversity parks, a new kind of park that won't let species vanish." In an interview with Vox, Wilson had this as his main message: "If we want to know what is on this planet and why it is a live planet, what contributes to that life and what it all means, ultimately for human existence, we should try to save it all." This is the real legacy of E.O. Wilson. This is what we should be fighting for. We will never get there if we start censoring science in order to promote some sort of an ideology. Obviously, I don't know all about the personal beliefs of E.O. Wilson. Like I said, I probably have some disagreement with him. There are certainly scientists in history who've done bastardized science to support their own ideology, which was a racist belief. Eugenics is a prime example of that. As I said, those scientists who supported eugenics, awful in their own ways, although they gave good contributions in other ways. So this was a shameful piece done by E.O. Wilson, done by Scientific American. With actually, I was amazed at the lack of understanding of the normal distribution and statistics. But anyway, there is that. So that's it for now, I think. Let me know what you think. I will link, of course, all of these in the description for you. Feel free to go have a look at them whenever you get the chance. Until next time, I'm Adrian. I hope you stay curious, my friends.